Good evening, everybody. I'm Betsy Fisher-Martin, the Executive Director of the Women in Politics Institute at American University. And welcome to another installment of our virtual summer series, Women on Wednesdays. To those of you new to our events, WPI is a nonprofit and nonpartisan institute in AU School Public Affairs that aims to close the gender gap in political leadership. And we offer academic and practical training, and we facilitate research and discussions like this one on women in politics. So thank you for being a part of our conversation this evening. We are delighted to have with us an all-star AU alum and a good friend, Jennifer Palmieri. She is probably no stranger to this audience from her time, of course, as communications director for President Obama in the White House, and then for the 2016 Hillary Clinton campaign. In addition to being the best-selling author of her first book, Madam President, she is also the president of the Center for American Progress's Action Fund and appears regularly on Showtime's The Circus, which is always fun. Jen, I think I met you way back when you were either at the Clinton White House or the DNC. Anyway, we've known each other a long time, and we're thrilled you're here with us tonight to talk about your new book, soon to be a bestseller again, I'm sure. She proclaims Our Declaration of Independence from a Man's World. I will save plenty of time for questions in the audience. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll notice a button to ask a question. So please do so during the course of our discussion. You'll also be able to upvote questions from others in the audience that you're interested in. And in the middle of the screen, of course, there's a nice green button that you can open a window and link to order a copy of Jen's book. And if you miss any of the discussion, you want to share it with friends, there will be a replay at the same link available that you use to register. So Jen, welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be with you. As you know, love talking to Betsy, love talking to AU community. It's great.
Well, thanks for being here. So 72 years after the Declaration of Independence, we had a declaration by women called the Declaration of Sentiments in 1848, written primarily by Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And borrowing a phrase from Thomas Jefferson, they proclaimed that it was self-evident that all men and women were created equal. And then 72 years after that, of course, 100 years ago this month, or August, a few days from now, women finally won the right to vote. And your book is filled with several of your own proclamations. The first one really, I think, frames your theme perfectly. I just want to read that. We proclaim, as women who continue to live in a world in which we are undervalued and underrepresented in positions of power relative to men, our Declaration of Independence from a man's world. Explain what you mean here and why you thought it was important to put some of those notions front and center in this discussion.
Because listen to how powerful it is when you just read that. You're like,
yeah,
what are we doing? It's we've had the right to vote for 100 years. I kind of marked that as sort of the entry into the man's world, when women had the tools to kind of pry open the professional world and the political world. And 100 years later, we're still not just a little bit, consistently undervalued and grossly underrepresented in positions of power relative to men. And this is where you're like, we are not doing it wrong, right? There's not anything left for women to prove. For decades, we kind of followed a man's model, right? We should behave like them, act like them, sound like them, try to dress like them. And for a while that worked. You know, for decades, we made real progress. And then a few decades ago, and you know all these stats well, we started to sputter out and plateau. And I never thought of myself as a woman struggling in a man's world. I thought to say that was self-defeatist. It's hard enough for women. Why would we proclaim that? And I just thought, well, you know, I thought we were done. I thought this issue was resolved. Women were considered equal. And eventually, if you kept our head down and kept working hard, you would get there. And we would achieve the same success as them. And then I had the realization, I'm not doing great in a man's world. I'm doing great propping it up. I am doing great making it run well for them. And that doesn't mean that men tried to hold me back. It just means we're operating under power systems that were built hundreds of years ago, that were built to accommodate men and value their efforts over women. And at some point, it switched. We're following their path, became a rut. And we've internalized so much about how we have to change ourselves to fit in, that I wanted us to declare this, proclaim it, say it all out loud about the crazy stuff that we hold in our heads that holds us back, and find a way to get rid of it. And that's why the book is structured that way.
And you write just from your own personal career, how it took you much longer to kind of rise up to the top than it took male counterparts. And that wasn't due at all to the fact that you weren't capable. And you write very frankly about how the person that had the job as communications director in the White House before you was 10 years younger.
Yeah. Now, he recruited me to come to the White House, right?
Yeah.
He's always been a big fan of my work, and I've always been a big fan of his work, and we've tried to hire each other for different jobs.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he would not say that he thinks it's right that I got the job 10 years after he did, right? But even with his help, you know, and he recruited me to come to the White House. I was his deputy. You know, and I was 10 years older than him, and I finally got the job. But, you know, and the terrible thing I realized about that was that I expected that, right? I expected to do worse than the men. And for a while, that was a sad but rational thing. And now I think we are by continuing to expect to do worse than the men, or to get paid less than them, or think that we have to adjust to their, like, we are acquiescing to it now.
Right.
And we're propping it up, and you got to bust out of that kind of way of thinking.
You write in the book, we have to reject the notion that the professional advancement of women is a zero-sum game, or we'll make it true. Talk about how you sort of have come to, as you reflect on your career, about working with other women and the need to actually help other women along the way.
I have always wanted to be one of the women that helped other women, right? You want to be a sister. And I would do it, but I would have these misgivings. I would think, you know, I may be helping the woman who's going to outshine me or replace me. And that sort of anxiety would sit there. I also would be concerned about, well, I can't be too obvious in my efforts to support women and help them get hired or get promoted, because then I look like I have an agenda, and that I'm trying to push women instead of being worried about what's in the larger enterprise's best interests, right? And that's the big switch for me. The switch what I've realized, and there's also, you know, as you know, Betsy, there's like plenty of sociological research that shows this, that more women in the room begets more women in the room. More women with power begets more women with power. We are actually not in competition with each other. We are each other's support system. And that is this, you know, the change I've made in my own life and in my own thinking is understanding that if you believe that you're in competition with other women, what you were really saying at the root of that is you're thinking, I don't belong here, right? What you're saying
that there's only room for one, right? Or
there's only room for one, because we don't, why is there only room for one? Play it out.
Yeah.
There's only room for one because I don't actually belong here, because this is actually not my game. It's a man's game. And, you know, white women have to realize that when we acquiesce to that, or we think we're in competition with other women or people of color, like, we're just propping all of these systems up that, you know, that block women, all people of color, from being able to succeed the way everybody should.
And you write about that magic number of like 30% being sort of monumental. Talk about that and why that is.
Yeah, so there's a lot of research about that 30% tipping theory. It came out like in the 70s. That is for marginalized populations, that once you reach 30%, that is when you stop being treated as like an other, and start just really assimilating into a workplace, so that if a workplace becomes 30% women, the women feel freer to advocate for other women, because they don't feel like they're going to be looked upon as having an agenda. They're going to be judged on their own skills. And so that's why it's important. A lot of state legislatures have gotten to the 30% mark recently. And like, that's when legislative bodies really start to change. Congress, of course, is not. Congress is at 25%, but it's getting better. But it's still bonkers,
right?
By the way, that Congress is still 75% men. Like, that's nuts. Like, why do we just think that's okay? It's not okay.
Is that a reason to advocate, as some European countries have, of a quota system in parliaments?
That's just like never going to work here. You know, like, we just don't. That's just not how we roll. It's just not. So I don't think that's going to work in the U.S. But it does. But what I like about it is it's not far away, right?
Yeah.
Like, we're so close, and there can be like a big flip with 30%, and the 30% in the workplace, or 30% in Congress, or what, you know. So that I find, like, you know, I don't find that number scary. I find that number inspiring and exciting.
You also share some info in the book about a Pew poll that I just wanted to share with folks as well. An interesting finding. Let me put that up there and see if everybody can hopefully see that. That shows millennial women more likely than other age groups to believe that men in America have it easier than women. 52% of millennials thought men had it easier. 45% say no difference. And the tiny little number on the end there, 3, is women have it easier.
Right.
Which is surprising.
I was surprised, but I find that that makes me optimistic, because if young, I don't know if when I was a millennial, when I was their age, I probably wouldn't have wanted to admit that women had it harder than men, because that was not something we were supposed to admit, right? We were supposed to be tough and be like, of course, I can do anything a man can do, and I don't have it any harder than men do. But these young women are like, no, it's still crazy. It's still harder. And the fact that they see that and say it out loud is encouraging to me. And also, as we discussed the other day, Beth's poll that shows in America, men and women both think that more work, the number of people who think that more work has to happen in order for gender equity to be reached is growing.
Why is that? Are we just more aware of inequalities now? Is like the Me Too movement? What do you think that is?
Yeah, I think so. I think that Me Too, because in August of 17, right before Me Too really exploded, right, was when Pew tested this, and then they came back and did it around, this summer and spring and summer, tied to the 100th anniversary of suffrage, and they saw that it had set by 7 points. Women were like more impatient, thought more work needed to be done to achieve gender equity. I think for men, I think Me Too probably exposed like, wow, this stuff happens to women all the time on a scale that they had not perhaps appreciated. And for some of us, I think all women have had different awakenings. For some of us, it was the election of Trump. But I think that there's for me, I feel sort of a sense of relief to have all of this out in the open, like what we're actually struggling with when it comes to gender equality, when it comes to racial equality, because we know what we were dealing with. And I think before there was a lot of gaslighting and shadow boxing, and you're like, no, it is still too hard. So what are we going to do? Right. That's where I like change the things that you can change that are in your own power. Because women have so much power, we make the world run. We for sure make the world run, right?
Yeah.
But we don't have the power to run the world. And that's the flip that needs to happen.
But so maybe that's a good thing. Then that the more we're aware of the inequalities, more people can work on.
I think so. Yeah. And good for people to be frustrated and think that more has to change. That's good.
So you also have a section in the book called Sisterhood, Supporting Other Women. And we talked about supporting other women in the workplace. But sometimes we see that it's important for women to speak up. The saying from Homeland Security, see something, say something, right? This notion of when we see something that's wrong, that is being, sexist attitudes or some sort of discrimination, to speak up and say something about it.
Yeah. And I find that, most men and most men I work with have always they've always wanted women to succeed, right? They want women to do well. They understand that something's still not right. And so I find, I talk about in the book, appropriating, which is, which all women have experienced, which all women are guilty of doing too, which is not listening to an idea when a woman says it, but when a guy says the same idea, you're like, wow, that's so smart, Jeff. And I find you have to call that out. That would happen on the Clinton campaign. It would happen to Hillary Clinton by her male staff on her campaign.
Well, we had Valerie on a couple weeks ago, Valerie Jarrett, and she talked about that in the Obama White House, and how, some of the women came together and tried to support each other through that.
Yeah, because we would just, and sometimes, it happens sort of organically that you just are each other's echo chamber. And so you're like, hey, Cecilia had a great point, or, Kathy Rumler, I don't know, she's the White House counsel. Maybe we should just
maybe she could have something out. Yeah.
Question about, legality, or Lisa Monaco is the head of counterterrorism, so maybe she knows a little more than the pollster does about that question. So we do things like that, but I do find when you call it out, say, like, I know you didn't mean to do this, but you just repeated what he said when, you know, when a woman said it before. People are, you know, and women do it too, right? Because we're all just, our whole life we've been sent signals that men are more interesting, more powerful, more valuable than women, our entire life. So we are attuned to hear their voices first too. And you, see something, say something, and also see something, say something. If you have something to say not related to sexism, right, that hasn't been said, a lot of women will just sit back and if they have something different to contribute than what's being said, they think that it's not worthy. But of course, if you have something different to say than what's everything else has been said, it's actually more valuable, more important for people to hear.
And you write about, speaking of voices, I mean, you write about sort of the two questions going on in your mind as you're trying to either publicly speak or speak during television interviews, and you're questioning yourself. How did you realize that that's what you were doing? Explain that to folks.
Here comes the pooch wandering through.
Oh.
So this is, I bet a lot of women, I mean, did this resonate with you, Betsy?
Yeah.
Right, I think a lot of women had this. So it's, I'm better now because now I just say what I think. But when I truly was White House communications director, I had a hard time with cable news interviews because, you know, they ask you a question. The first question is all set up to be some kind of gotcha. And I would buy into the premise of the question because I wanted the person asking the question to feel heard and understood and to come off as pleasant. And
I'm shocked that you would say that about cable news, Jen.
I know.
They try to bait you on the first question.
I know. You know, it's distressing to that, but I would find that would sometimes happen. So, and what I found was, what I realized, and it was during my Dear Madam President book tour that I sort of realized this, that I had two conversations in my head my whole time, in my whole adult life. The first conversation is, I want to say this. And then, but then you stop and you check yourself and you think about how is what I want to say going to be challenged? And then I would try to reconcile the two, and I would only speak what I wanted to say if I knew what I wanted to, if I was clear on what I wanted to say and I was sure I could defend it. And then I would, which meant, and if I couldn't reconcile the two, I wouldn't say anything, which meant for a lot of my life, I have not been saying what I think.
But you were also in many positions speaking for other people, which is even more difficult.
It's even more difficult because you feel the added responsibility.
Like, am I going to say something wrong? Yeah,
and they're tough, you know, like when you're speaking for Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, it's like tough questions. But you think that like I don't think we appreciate how much how much we censor ourselves. And, you know, it's a really powerful thing to realize. I was sort of sickened when I thought, wow, I often don't actually say what I believe. And how would it be different if I did? I had this one experience with a CBS anchor, a female anchor, because the Dear Madam President's got a chapter about crying at work. I'm a big fan. It's an activity I spend a lot of time doing. And she said to me, well, what do you say to people say it's just not professional to cry at work? And normally I would say, well, I understand why people could say that. And I know for someone it's difficult. And I was just like, no, I say it is. I say it is professional for women to cry in the workplace because women are in the workplace and, you know, a lot of times we get frustrated and need an outlet, and it's perfectly fine to do that. I say it is.
Right. And
I don't need any more authority than that. And she was like, good for you. I was like, yeah, Elaine, because it was Elaine Cano. That's what we're doing now. Like, I say it is, and not to doubt yourself, and you're not doing yourself or anyone else any favors by continuing to censor yourself. Because look around the world, we don't have all the answers, right? Nobody's got it all figured out. So more perspectives are good.
And speaking of someone who's not afraid to use their voice, I want to get your thoughts on AOC last week and her floor speech, taking that verbal assault that by Congressman Yoho and turning it into this larger historical moment to really speak out about the empowerment of women on the House floor and what that meant. And also, how is she able to be so an effective communicator in so many ways?
Yeah, she is a remarkably effective communicator, and she's a very able politician. And I did two things. I wrote a piece about this for Vanity Fair last week, actually before she actually gave her speech, and then I did a video for Recount about just about how effective, like trying to breaking down how effective she is, because you know, she is a young Hispanic woman who ousted an incumbent. She's like a walking threat in Congress, right? She represents a threat to the way power has traditionally been divided up in Congress. And she knows that. And so she's had to adapt her own style from being an activist to being a congresswoman. You know, she shouldn't have to do that, right? She shouldn't have to be worried about being a woman or being a young woman. But what she's done is she's internalized lessons that make her more effective. And that's what's so interesting. Right. You know, when Yoho, calls her what he does, she doesn't lash out. She doesn't make it about herself. She had a little kind of snarky tweet back at him that like kept her power. And then she rallied all of her colleagues to her side and made it came to the House floor, made it a much larger moment about women in general. And I think that there's going to be books written about that, everything that led up to that moment. You know, I think we're going to remember that as a historic time. But she's extraordinarily effective because she's so authentic. She owns all of her story. That gives her standing to like break down tropes that other members of Congress fall prey to. And I think that's why she's such a breakout star and why she's so effective at explaining policy in relatable terms.
Right, because she could have very easily just let it go, right? And just, as many as probably would, just,
She could have let it go. And she's so interesting. She doesn't talk about herself, but she elevates the institution, right? She's
exactly.
a congresswoman. I represent these people. And it's like the message is, by offending me, you're offending these, like the good people of Queens.
Yeah.
And, I think that she's had to learn quickly how to fit in, like all women have. This is what I want women to appreciate, is that by working hard to fit into a man's world, you've developed really valuable skills that you should be proud of. You should leave behind the doubts, leave behind the things that make you doubt yourself. But by all means, embrace how resourceful we are, how astute we are, because we're always listening carefully, how we always figure out a way to get the job done. Just make sure that what you do is truly valued for the worth it has and brings to the world.
And how did you think about this in the Hillary Clinton campaign? Because, people would refer to her as being shrill, or her voice. And I mean, I'm sure as a communicator, you had to think through all of those things. So how did you try to counsel her through that process?
So we would get, at first I was like, I got on the campaign, I was all excited, like, I'm going to be the person who figures this out. I'm going to be the person who figures out how Hillary can have a great relationship with the press and people see the real her and kind of leave behind this polarizing image. And then after a few months, I realized I'm not going to be able to do that, because the polarizing image, the doubt people have about her and her voice and her ambition, and there's just something about her I don't like. It's not really about the person Hillary Clinton. It is about it's doubts and sort of unease, confoundment we feel about watching the first woman go through this process. It didn't seem revolutionary in the moment that a woman was running for president, but when you look back over history, it's a very big deal for a woman to be in charge. And it doesn't mean that people didn't like her or thought her voice was shrill or all sexist. It's just we are used to seeing a man in that role and having her voice, being questions about her ambition. Why does she want this job? She's always so sketchy. She's always hiding something. You hear the same things about Kamala Harris. She's so ambitious. She's too cautious. She doesn't show us her real self. And I'm like, whoa, that when you hear these really sort of vague, uneasy, I just don't really know, but there's something about her I just don't like.
Right.
That's when gender or race, I think, is coming in. And so eventually I realized, ignore we would try to listen to the criticism that was constructive, but stuff that's like, I don't like her voice or her presentation style, you're like, okay, like that's just because you haven't seen it before.
But you guys consulted, you write about consulting researchers and psychologists to try to take that apart. And
we had psychiatrists and psychologists, we had researchers, you know, we had there's, you know, some of the researchers that you work with, the Barbara Lee Foundation, and they were like, you know, like, hey, I hate to be the ones to tell you this, but here's what you need to do. She can't express her ambition. Her ambition always has to be in service to others, right? And so we're like, okay, fine. So, you know, why did she get into public service? Well, she got into public service because she cares about kids. Well, why does she care about kids? She cares about kids because her mom had a terrible childhood. Okay, well, that's a story you need to tell so that people understand her interest in public service is not about her personal ambitions. Her interest in public service stems from caring about children, right? So
instead of I want to be president because
I've always wanted to be president. And this is why where Elizabeth Warren was so genius in her stump speech, where Elizabeth Warren would say in her stump speech, which I could give to you verbatim, I've already had my dream job. My dream job was to be a public school teacher. I've lived my dream. And then she does the thing where she goes like this and she kicks, she's like, woo, you know, she does that.
Yeah.
And he's like, and it's like, she's such a genius because you're like, oh, okay. You said your ambition is to be a teacher, which is something we're super comfortable with women doing.
Right.
You put your ambition in the past. I've had my dream job. So in case we were thinking her dream job was being the first woman president, no, that's not it. I wanted to be a teacher. And so the point is, like, you have to go through all these crazy machinations that, you know, I'm grateful for the research that tried to, you know, guide us to do that. It wasn't very successful for Hillary because people knew her too well already and it was hard to use her. But that's what it's about. It's not really about the woman. It's about a woman in a role that's still unfamiliar to us. And that's why women candidates, you know, you work with them a lot. They just have to gut through this piece of it. And I think, and women need to, you know, I got a chapter on ambition. You got to celebrate your ambition, the ambition of other women. When other women make it, you got to be like, yes, that's great. Good for her. It's great that she wants to do this. Like, right. It's like we admire it in men, and we have to, like, this is our charge. We got to get past over this hump that women being ambitious is an undesirable quality in them.
So I want to ask you, as the suspense is growing day by day here, about the VP pick for Biden. But first, I want to let everybody express their own vote here, and I want to. Down at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a poll, everybody. And if you can go there, and I'm just curious on the audience, who everybody out there would like to see as Biden's VP pick. So if you, everybody go to the poll and please cast your votes while we have this discussion about the VP pick. All right, so tell us, and in fact, we have one question from the audience about this too. How is the campaign preparing for the VP pick? What is that process like?
I think that they have, well, you know, there are some Clinton veterans on that campaign, and they understand. I think they all understand that whoever it is, she's in for a rough time because we have 3, you know, white men, older white men, that are set on the ticket. And so we're going to put a woman in this dynamic, probably a woman of color, and things just go haywire with women in politics still. And plus, you know that Trump will go after her. Big of course. Right. There's some people who are like advocating for one candidate or the other because they think that candidate is inoculated against attacks by Trump, and that Trump can't attack that person. Trump can attack anyone. You know, like that's not something, if it was up to me, that is not a quality I would look for. I would not pick my running mate based off of whether or not I thought Trump could make a good attack. Trump is going to attack. He lies about people. He's going to do it. I want somebody who's been through hellfire. Like, I want somebody who has, you know, been through a really hard thing, because she's in for a really hard attack. Now, when Trump does attack her, he comes down rabbit holes with women, and if the woman is particularly good at baiting him, he could go down rabbit holes that will be unpleasant for her, but will not be effective for him, right? And that just will be something that she's going to have to deal with and absorb.
And so, what do you think is the overwhelming, besides someone who's tough, right? What other qualities do you think he's going to look for? Is it a comfort level? Is it someone who has electoral success somewhere? What do you think is going through their minds?
I think probably electoral success is not as as much on their minds as in other cycles. And that I think he wants somebody that he believes will be a good governing partner, the way Joe Biden was for Barack Obama, somebody who's ready to do the job on day one, and somebody that's going to be tough enough to go through this process that she's going to be. And I'll just say, no matter who it is, I mean, I've seen a lot of reporting about, I saw reporting today about Harris and how, you know, allegedly some people classified. And by the way, don't like ever, the people who know are not talking to the press. Just that needs to be said. I said it. A little pro tip for everyone. But some people saying like, well, you don't want to pick Harris because she's too ambitious. Whoever that woman is, from the very day she's picked, the press are going to view her through a lens of a potential 2024 president or candidate, and they're going to look at her ambition with a lot of questions. So she's just kind of in for it. It's going to be tough that way too. You know, they're like attaching that to Harris right now, but it's not unique to her. It's just that she's run for president before, but I think that will happen to whoever it is.
All right, so I'll put you on the spot on this one because our poll here online that a lot of people have voted for, Susan Rice is in the lead here.
I love Susan
What is your, and I know she's been profiled recently and has had a lot of attention on her in the last couple of days.
Yeah.
And obviously you worked with her in the Obama administration. What are your thoughts on her?
I mean, I look, see my face. I'm like, also, like I adore her. I adore Susan Rice, and she would be awesome. She is, you know, there's always like as they get close to the decision, there's somebody like Susan that sort of breaks out, like, hey, maybe it's going to be this person, and then we always think it's going to be, and then you think maybe it's going to be Susan, and then at the end it's Kamala Harris, and you're like, it was always going to be Kamala, and like we got excited about Susan at the end, but it was also going to be Kamala. The reason why it could be Susan is Joe Biden really likes her, and if there is concern that, you know, I mean, Chris Dodd saying Harris didn't express remorse, I find that a very troubling thing for an older white man to say about a black woman who ran for president and obviously ran her campaign the way she thought she should. And when a guy says it's politics, that's accepted. And when a black woman says it, that seemed to be a problem. I was like, that is not good. Susan could be a good alternative. She obviously has a ton of foreign policy experience. The thing she doesn't have that I think might be important to Biden is elected experience, because he had so much elected experience. I think he really values that. So, and
just the whole notion of campaigning and kissing babies along the way. That whole
though, she would love it, and she would be
not that you can do much campaigning in this era anyway.
Yeah, she'd be like this on Zoom.
Yeah, exactly. Sitting on Zoom calls all day long. Okay, let me get a couple other questions in from the audience here. Let's see, this is from Caitlin. What advice would you give young women in navigating male-dominated spaces, especially in politics, and how can they succeed, and how can they create spaces for other women to succeed?
Force an older woman that works with you to be a mentor. You know, I've been really surprised. Young women come to me and say, I need you to be my mentor. And I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't know that was my job. And it is. And find somebody who's going to protect you and force them to do that. And they will understand what they need to do, and they will want to do that. Know right away that the other young women you work with are your allies. They are not your competition. They are your allies. They are your friends. Share information. Ask everyone what they're making. When you get hired, ask if men are being paid more money than you. Like, you just have to advocate for yourself from the front end. And I know for some young women, it may be you're in a male-dominated profession, and what I'm saying is too radical for that particular setting. Like, ramp one step back, but you do have to be pushing the envelope. And there is a strength in numbers. Women really do make the world run. We really, really do. And if we band together, you're going to be a force. The women who are the most successful that I know are the ones who never cared what men thought. Tomorrow or next week, I'm talking to Kara Swisher. If you all know her, she's got a great podcast. That woman is fearless. From the day she entered the professional workplace, she never cared what men thought about her. She never cared what anybody thought about her. And that is a real superpower. Now, it can't work for everyone, but like, don't doubt that as something that's in your ability to do as well.
Jessica has a similar question, but she wants to know, when you're in a workplace that's dominated by men who will not allow you to move up. And she says her gut instinct is sometimes just to move on.
Yeah. I think that is, yeah, no, I think that's right. I talked to a woman the other day who, this is what, but you can push on it. Like if you want to stay and otherwise it's a good place. You know, what I find is a lot of times women will be considered for a job, and then men will get promoted over the women. Sometimes even when the woman has a more experience because the guy's just a better fit, right? He's just a better, it's nothing against you, he's just a better fit, or maybe you're overqualified, so you're not the right fit. And you really have to push against this. And I have a chapter about, for men too, about things they can do. Is like when you interview people and you keep defaulting to the white guy because he's just a better fit. Of course he's a better fit.
Right, because that's what we're used to seeing.
Yes, of course.
You have like the sports analogy in the book.
Yeah, that we, you know, if we had grown up all our lives sitting around the TV watching women play soccer every Sunday instead of men play football, and the local high school organized their sports so that, you know, the boys played on the weekdays and the girls got to play on the weekends.
Friday nights, yeah.
Friday Night Lights was all about girls soccer, and every time a president opened her mouth, all 45 of them, it had been women, and only 7% of the Fortune 500 CEOs were men. If that's the world you lived in, you would have a lot of doubts about yourself too, and you would not fit in either. And I think, so it's like, of course he's a better fit. I may do the job differently, but here's how I would do it better. But I would challenge them, particularly if you're willing to go, if you're willing to leave anyway, challenge that. Because I think, you know, and most men want women to succeed, right? This is not, but they just don't see it. They're lacking in imagination of what it could be like for, you know, women to do the job differently.
Here's a question from Pam, back about AOC. She said, I loved what she said, but I had to warm back up to her because of how she was to Pelosi. I guess it refers to when she was coming in and not voting for Pelosi for speaker. Could you comment on that?
I think she's learned a lot. It's interesting to me. I mean, look, I actually like, even though I was a big Hillary person, I actually like Bernie Sanders, that old curmudgeon. But she's learned more in 18 months about how to be effective in Congress than Bernie Sanders has learned in 30 years. You know, and there was an interview with her in the New York Times from last fall where she talked about this, and they talked about the Pelosi, and, you know, she figured out a way to be like, that woman's in charge, and if I want to get stuff done to be effective for my constituents, for the issues I care about, you got to moderate how you engage. And so she has really adapted, and that's made her really effective. So that's why I think she's such an able politician, and why she should be around for a long time, is she knows what you have to do how you have to adapt to be successful. And that's why men like Ted Yoho, I think, are dinosaurs, not just because he's an older guy, but because they're not adapting, right? They're just, and you're not going to survive if you're still going to be threatened by the presence of a young woman with some power.
Here's a question from Michelle. How can women get and keep permanent seats at Biden's table?
How can women get and keep permanent seats at Biden's table? He's going to have to be in his face. I think that he will. When I worked with him, I had a great relationship with him when I was the White House communications director. I have found him to be somebody, you know, who really values and understands the input of and get the input of women. I don't expect that this is going to be. I don't expect that it's going to be a problem. But if it happens that it's defaulting to like a white male, I mean, you know, I will freak out. Everybody will freak out. We'll freak out. It'll be fine.
Well, he has a woman running his campaign.
Huh?
He has a woman running his campampaiin.
Yes, Jenna Malley Dillon's running the campaign. Kate Bedingfield, deputy campaign manager, has been with them for a long time. Simone Sanders is a long time spokesperson when he was in the White House. Shayla Murray, Kate Bedingfield was part of that as well. Cynthia Rice is policy person. You know, there's a lot of his sister, his wife. There's a lot of you know, strong women around him that he values. That is not something I worry about. I guess is the best way to put it.
But when Obama first came into office, there was certainly that first year of notions that it was a boys' club over there, right? And that women may have been at the table, but were they really being heard? And was it sort of too insular with the men who were on the campaign? And that's when I need to change some of that. Yeah,
they changed some of that. So I came in 2011, and that was when it was not going great. That's what happens sometimes. For enterprises that are not going great, that's when it's like, hey, come.
Oh, yeah, that's an idea.
Hey, lady, come take over. It looks like we were. And a lot of them said that to me, like, we thought we knew everything. We don't know everything, and it's really hard. And I had a lot of experience because I worked for Bill Clinton for 8 years. And they were super welcoming, and I was worried about that because they had that reputation, and I found it was not true at all. Barack Obama, David Plouffe, Dan Pfeiffer, these guys were all very welcoming, very much wanted me to be there, and made sure on my very first day, I was like in the Oval Office. I was a little like, ooh, okay, I guess these guys were not BSing me. I am part of the team. And one thing I'll tell you that Barack Obama said once to a group of women, we were all in the office, all in the Oval Office, it was only women, and he could tell that one of us was holding back, and he was like, I need you to say what you think. You are here not just because of the job you have, you are here because I need the perspective of women too. And I realized, like, if you're not speaking up, you're just not doing your job. And he could be frustrated if you didn't do that. So it's not just about making women feel good. It's about understanding that is our role. That's our job.
Right. We talked to Cecilia, as the domestic policy advisor a couple of weeks ago, and she talked about this notion of that there would be a fake meeting before a real meeting, that you were maybe sometimes tokenized and invited to meeting A, but that was really the fake meeting, and decisions were really being made at meeting B.
That's where it's good to have 12 years of White House experience, because I understood where decisions actually got made, and so in the hallway or waiting for your lunch at the mess or on the way to the gym or whatever. But like, I knew where to make that right, where to use the influence where you needed.
Here's a question from Deb. She says, the highest powered woman in the U.S. politics is Nancy Pelosi. What makes her so effective?
She's so amazing. I think that she is, this is her book, right? Her book is Know Your Power. She understands power and how to leverage it like no one else in American politics. And she is a leader, meaning like she takes care of her people. She supports her caucus. She makes sure that they're taken care of. She protects them. And she never gets over her skis, right? She always, Nancy Pelosi is not bringing a bill to the floor that is going to fail. And she just keeps getting better, She's another one who always is adapting. I find her enormously inspiring.
Yeah, and Deb, I'll just say too, I don't know if you caught our interview with Molly Ball, who wrote a great book on Pelosi a couple weeks ago. If you want to rewatch that, because she talks a little bit about some of those things that Jen mentioned as well. Let's see. Here is a question from Julie. Do you have any ideas or solutions about the economy and policies during COVID that seem to be hurting women more than men?
Yeah. So here's like 4 things about that. Women, most of it make up the bulk of the unemployed from COVID, the bulk of the essential workers, the lowest paid professions, and the biggest burdens at home when it comes to childcare and educating kids. And I think that this has to be, and hopefully if there's a Biden administration, in the Clinton campaign, we saw those issues as economic issues because we understood that they were keeping the workforce from being as productive and as big as it needed to be and as innovative as it needed to be. These just have to be treated as economic issues. So it's like, we don't pay teachers enough. We don't pay home health care workers enough. We don't value women's work. That is not just the way things are. That's the way things were set up to be. Okay, that's a big difference. They were set up to be that men's work is valued more than women, and there is no reason that home health care workers and teachers are not paid for the incredibly important work that they do. That's a long-term problem, but I think it's got to start with, and women have to band together and demand this. I mean, the women I know that are raising, Betsy, you're doing this. I mean, raising children at home during this time are at their wit's end, and that's got to be political pressure applied to change it.
Mine's a teenager, so I'd be at my wit's end regardless, but
So,
COVID or no COVID. Let's see, here's a question from Jessica. Were there women in your life who helped teach you how to celebrate your ambitions, or did you have to learn on the job? And how did that look like over your professional career?
My mother was weirdly involved in politics as a volunteer when I was young. We lived in Mississippi, and I watched her get involved, and I think that put the seed in my head that I could see women do that and have an impact. And then honestly, I modeled myself after the men because they were the ones with the power, right? They were the ones that got the big jobs. And it was not only until like the last 5-6 years that I started looking at, when I worked with Barack Obama and watched how effective Nancy Pelosi was and looked to her for sort of inspiration and lessons. And then of course, Hillary, actually working directly for her was when this like whole thing exploded. And my God, the admiration I have for that woman to get up every, because I would ask her, how do you do this? How do you get up every day and face it? And she says, this is good advice. She's like, I do not get overwhelmed by the enormity of the problem in front of me. I get up every day. I do what I can do with that day. I don't look too far ahead. I go to bed, and tomorrow I get up and do the same thing. And I think, once you face some of the terrible things that she's had to go through, you realize you're stronger than you know. You're strong enough to get through any day, and that's all you need to do. And that's, she is who I try to model myself after.
Is there anything during that campaign, just from a gender perspective, that you would have done differently if you had the chance to, in trying to deal with a lot of the issues that came up that were gendered?
Yeah, it's very hard. I wanted to talk more about how she felt about things. I wanted to talk more about some of the tougher experiences she had personally, and what it had, things that she had, like, that it had taught her, or how she got through tough times. And she felt, and I think she was probably right in the moment, that was not going to be received well. It's just a different universe than we are in now. It's just really so. And I think that the way like emails ended up being sort of the vessel by which we, as the like broader community in politics, kind of, it's, that's where like the suspicion around her and her ambition kind of took hold. And I don't think there was anything that we could have done to actually get over that. But that was, I think, was sort of destined for the first woman. Kirsten, I should have mentioned her brand in the last answer, because I really do admire Kirsten's like, I want to be the first woman president.
Like out of the box.
Yep. And I'm running a pro-woman, I am running on a pro-woman agenda, because I actually think that more women in power would be good. Do you think that wouldn't be good? Because I think it would be good. And I've talked to her about it, why she's so fearless about expressing that. And she attributes it to sports, which is interesting. Sports is so powerful. She said because she did sports so much growing up, she's not afraid to lose. And she thinks a lot of women are afraid to lose. And that's why they have this fear about expressing it. But I think that her, like, just really unforgivingly ambitious, feminist, campaign is going to help women over the long term.
So while we have you, since you are an AU alum, can you talk a little bit about your experience at AU and what you studied, and coming up from Mississippi, and how that got you interested in politics in the first place?
It was at the time my dad was in the Navy, so we were blessed. We were in California when I was in high school, and I went to a summer program at Georgetown, and I had a professor while I was in high school, and had a professor who was from AU, Bill Kimberlin, who was an amazing political science professor, and he was like, you should check out AU, and I wasn't familiar with it, but I knew I wanted to study politics, and so I was like, I want to be in a place that really values experience as well as the academics, and that's why I went there, and it worked out. I worked for my congressman. I interned for him. I ended up working for him.
Leon Panetta?
Yeah, I was really lucky. Leon Panetta was my congressman. I got a total joker as a congressman. And Leon. So yeah, it took me to the Clinton White House, and he became, Secretary of Defense under Obama. So it was a great way to learn. But I found it, and I was a swimmer. I had an athletic scholarship too.
But the importance of doing internships in Washington, right? I mean, students at AU do so many of them, but I think they're so important.
It's just the whole deal. Like, if you want to be in politics, intern on the Hill or a campaign, it's just like it's how it all happens. You get into the community that, for better or worse, is pretty insular, but it's not hard to get in. And once you're in it, you're in it.
I want to let everybody know about some other upcoming folks we have on Wednesdays. Let's see if I can make this full screen. Yes, here. So next Wednesday, on August 5th, we are going to have Congresswoman Jaya Paul, and she has written a new book, Use the Power You Have, A Brown Woman's Guide to Politics and Political Change. So she will be there on August 5th, and then we'll be away for 2 weeks while I take my high schooler to college in Texas, a road trip. And then we'll be back actually on the anniversary of suffrage, on the actual date that the 19th Amendment took effect. And we will talk about suffrage at 100 with two professors who have just written or co-edited a new book called Suffrage at 100. So we will do that at 7 o'clock time, different from our 6, because one of the professors has to teach a class. And so we will have that at 7 on the 26th. So I hope everyone can join us for that. And Jen, I want to thank you so much for being here with us tonight and for taking questions and for all you do. I know you are a big supporter of the Institute and our work, so I want to thank you for that as well.
So fun, Betsy. Thank you. It was great. Loved it. Loved all the questions. Thank you, everybody, for great questions.
Great. Well, I hope everybody has a good rest of the week, and we will see you next week. Thanks.
Thanks.